5 minutes after another woman received the keys to a $1.2 million home during my retirement ceremony, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Funny how my son suddenly remembered I existed the moment he thought he'd lost something he believed was his. I stared at the screen buzzing inside my purse, Jason calling, again and again, then Brooke, then Jason again. The applause inside the ballroom was still echoing, cameras were still pointed toward the stage, and Maya Bennett was standing there crying with a ring of oversized ceremonial keys in her hands. I didn't answer. For 40 years I'd answered everyone else's calls. That evening could wait another 5 minutes. When people ask me what hurt the most, they usually assume it was the lawsuit that came later. It wasn't. It was the empty chair. The Hilton Columbus downtown ballroom looked beautiful that evening. White tablecloths, blue hydrangeas on every table, old co-workers hugging each other, contractors I'd known since the late 80s, city council members, young employees who had only known me as Mrs. Mercer. Nearly 500 people came. One seat stayed empty. The little white place card simply read, Jason Mercer. I must have looked at it 20 times before the ceremony started. I'd imagined my son standing at the podium telling everyone how proud he was of his mother. Henry Whitaker, our company founder, had asked Jason weeks earlier if he'd like to introduce me. Jason had accepted. Then, 48 hours before the event, he called, "Mom, Brooke already booked this vacation months ago. You just remembered?" I forgot it was the same weekend. I smiled into the phone, even though he couldn't see me. "Well, maybe you can change the flights." A long pause. "They're non-refundable." That told me everything. It wasn't that he couldn't come. It was that he didn't want to lose the money. The morning of my retirement, Brooke posted a picture from Cabo San Lucas. Jason sat beside her wearing sunglasses, holding a frozen drink with a tiny umbrella. The caption read, "Finally choosing ourselves." I remember staring at that picture while sitting in my kitchen eating half a piece of toast. 40 years, one retirement, one son. And somehow a beach won. I met Whitaker Residential in 1986. Back then, I answered phones at the front desk for $6.25 an hour. I wasn't looking for a career. I was looking for health insurance. My husband, Paul, had been diagnosed with leukemia the year before. After he passed away, I had a 15-year-old son, a mortgage, and exactly $300 in savings. So I kept showing up. One promotion became another: receptionist, office coordinator, operations manager, vice president, eventually chief operating officer. Somehow 40 years disappeared. Henry Whitaker liked to joke that I'd been promoted so many times nobody remembered who was actually supposed to answer the phones anymore. He wasn't entirely wrong. About an hour before guests arrived, I walked into the ballroom to check the seating chart. That's when I saw Jason's chair. I almost asked someone to remove it. Instead, I stood there looking at it until my old friend Linda from accounting walked over. "You okay?" I nodded too quickly. "I'm fine." She looked at the empty chair. "No," she said softly. "You're pretending." She was right. I stepped into the hallway and pulled out my phone. There was one person I suddenly wanted beside me. "Maya?" "Hi, Elaine. Are you working today?" "I was just finishing paperwork." I hesitated. "I have an empty seat." Silence. Then she understood. "I'll be there." I've known Maya almost her entire life. Her mother, Ruth Bennett, and I started at Whitaker Residential within weeks of each other. When our boys, well, Jason and Maya practically grew up in the same office break room after school. Years later, life pulled everyone in different directions. Ruth became a single mother. Then cancer found her. She fought for almost 3 years. I sat beside her hospital bed 2 nights before she died. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't let Maya carry everything alone," I promised. Funny thing is, after Ruth was gone, Maya became the one looking after me. She drove me to eye appointments after my cataract surgery. She brought groceries when my arthritis made stairs miserable. When I tore my shoulder and couldn't wash my own hair, she showed up without making a big speech about it. She simply said, "Lean back." Not once did she ask for anything in return. She arrived at the hotel wearing a navy dress I'd seen before. "I hope this isn't too fancy," she laughed. Then she smiled awkwardly. "It's actually the dress I wore at Mom's funeral." I hugged her. "You look beautiful." She handed me a coffee from a Speedway gas station. "I figured you'd forget to eat." I did. And she reached into her purse. "I brought safety pins." I laughed. "My shoe broke." I noticed. "There goes 40 years of professional dignity," she grinned. "Imagine surviving corporate America just to lose a fight with a $12 shoe." That was exactly what I needed. Someone who made me laugh instead of pretending nothing hurt. The ceremony began with speeches. Old photographs appeared on giant screens. There I was in 1986 with feathered hair and enormous shoulder pads. The room erupted in laughter. Henry walked to the podium. "Most of you know Elaine Mercer built this company alongside us." He paused. "What many of you don't know is someone else helped save this company long before any of us could repay her." A picture of Ruth appeared. I frowned. Henry looked toward me. "Elaine, you didn't know this either." He began telling a story from 1992. The housing market had collapsed. Banks refused another loan. Payroll was due on Friday. Quietly, without asking for recognition, Ruth loaned the company nearly every dollar she'd inherited from her father. Enough to keep 60 families employed. I felt my breath catch. Ruth never told me, not once. Henry continued. Years later, when the company recovered, Ruth accepted repayment of the loan but refused additional compensation. Instead, she signed an agreement allowing the remaining appreciation value to fund permanent housing someday for someone rebuilding their life. A new slide appeared, the Ruth Bennett Legacy Housing Trust. The trust became active this year. He smiled toward Maya. Our independent selection committee reviewed every qualified application. Elaine nominated one person, but she never knew who the board selected. Maya slowly looked at me, then back at Henry. He held up a single set of keys. "The first legacy home belongs to..." He paused. "Maya Bennett." The room exploded with applause. Maya didn't move. She whispered, "No, this has to be a mistake." Henry shook his head. "It isn't." She walked toward the stage with tears running down her face. I followed more slowly. My knees were aching, my heart even more. When Henry placed the keys into her hands, Maya leaned close and whispered, "My mom never told me." I squeezed her arm. That's because she never did kind things, hoping someone would clap. 5 minutes later, my purse started vibrating. Jason, 6 missed calls. Brooke, 3 more. Then a text appeared. "Don't let them finalize anything. That house belongs to our family." I looked across the ballroom. His chair was still empty. And for the first time that evening, I realized he hadn't missed my retirement. He'd missed what he thought was waiting for him. I barely slept the night after my retirement. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw 2 images fighting each other. Jason smiling beside a swimming pool in Cabo. Maya standing on stage with tears streaming down her face, holding a set of keys she never expected to receive. By sunrise, my coffee had gone cold twice. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing. I finally answered around 8:30. Jason didn't even say good morning. "Mom, tell me this hasn't been finalized." I leaned back in my kitchen chair. "What exactly are you talking about?" "The house." "It wasn't my house." "You know what I mean." "No," I said calmly. "Actually, I don't." His voice grew sharper. "You let strangers convince you to give away something worth over $1 million. I rubbed my aching knee while listening. "It belonged to the trust." "You nominated her." "Yes." "You could have nominated me." I almost laughed. "You weren't applying for housing assistance, Jason." "That's not the point." "No," I answered quietly. "It really isn't." There was a long silence. Then Brooke's voice floated through the speaker. "Ask her if she understands what she's done." Jason repeated it almost word for word. "Mom." Do you even understand what you've done? I looked around my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd packed his school lunches, helped him memorize spelling words, stayed awake waiting for him to come home after his first date. I understand perfectly. He hung up. People think betrayal arrives all at once. It usually doesn't. It arrives in little pieces. Looking back, I realized Jason hadn't changed overnight. He'd simply been asking different questions over the past few years. Not, how are your knees? But, when are you planning to update your will? Not, need help around the house? But, do you really need a place this big? Not, how's retirement treating you? Instead, have you decided who's listed as beneficiary on your investment accounts? At the time, I told myself he was just being responsible. Lots of adult children talked with aging parents about estate planning. At least that's what I wanted to believe. 3 months before my retirement, Jason showed up carrying a leather folder. I brought something for you. What is it? Just basic planning paperwork. He spread several forms across my dining room table. You should have a power of attorney. I already do. When did you update it? I honestly don't remember. Then this is easier. He smiled as if he were helping. I glanced through the pages. Most of it looked ordinary. Medical decisions, emergency contacts, banking authority. Still, something made me uncomfortable. I'd like Denise to look at these first. His smile disappeared. Mom, it's standard paperwork. Then Denise won't find anything unusual. You don't trust me? I looked at him for a long moment. I trust lawyers to read legal documents. He laughed. I'm not trying to steal your toaster. I laughed too. Or at least I pretended to. The next morning I drove to Denise Harper's office in Upper Arlington. Denise had handled our family's legal work for almost 20 years. She adjusted her reading glasses and slowly flipped through Jason's paperwork. She never rushed, never dramatized anything. After about 15 minutes, she placed the papers on her desk. Did you read paragraph 14? I thought I did. She turned the document toward me. Hidden in the middle was language giving Jason broad authority over financial decisions if I became unable to effectively manage my affairs. That's wider than I expected. Denise nodded. Much wider. Could he sell my house? If the right conditions existed, she paused. Yes, I felt cold. But I'm perfectly healthy. I know. She folded the papers. I'm not saying Jason intended anything dishonest. But I wouldn't sign these. I never told Jason exactly why. I simply said I wasn't ready. He shrugged it off so easily that I convinced myself I'd imagined the warning. Now I wasn't so sure. 2 weeks after the retirement ceremony, another surprise arrived. Not in the mail. On my phone. Elaine, it's Carol Simmons. Carol had been a realtor in Columbus for nearly 30 years. She'd helped Paul and me buy our Bexley home back in 1994. Oh my goodness, Carol, how are you? I'm fine, but I need to ask you something. Her voice sounded unusually careful. Are you planning to sell your house? I frowned. No. Move into assisted living? No. Another pause. I thought so. What happened? I can't discuss private conversations with another client. I understand. But, she sighed softly. Before I went any further, I wanted to make absolutely certain you had authorized someone to explore selling your property. I haven't. I figured. I appreciate you calling. I've known you too long not to. She wouldn't tell me another word. She didn't need to. Someone had already been planning a future I hadn't agreed to. A few days later, my financial advisor called. His tone sounded just as cautious. Elaine, Jason reached out asking general questions about incapacity planning. My stomach tightened. What did you tell him? Nothing. Thank you. I thought you should know. By then, the pattern was impossible to ignore. One conversation, then another, different professionals, the same subject, my future, without me. The official court papers arrived the following Tuesday. I carried the envelope into the kitchen before opening it. Probate court, Franklin County, petition for guardianship, filed by my only son. The words blurred together for a moment. Memory concerns, undue influence, financial exploitation. I had to sit down. It wasn't anger I felt first. It was disbelief. Jason honestly believed a judge should decide whether I was still capable of running my own life. I called Denise immediately. She listened quietly while I stumbled through the paperwork. When I finally stopped talking, she spoke in the same calm voice she always used. "Take a breath. I can't believe he did this." "I can." That surprised me. "You can?" "I've handled elder law for 35 years. She sighed. "Sometimes guardianship petitions protect vulnerable parents." Another pause. "And sometimes they're filed far too early. What happens now?" "The court reviewed his emergency request this morning." "And?" "They denied immediate emergency authority." I let out a shaky breath. "So it's over?" "No. It now follows the normal probate process." She explained what came next. A court investigator, independent medical evaluations, financial review, interviews. Evidence from both sides. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. 6 weeks. It suddenly felt like a lifetime. That afternoon, I drove downtown for no particular reason. I parked outside the Franklin County Probate Court and sat there with the engine off. People walked in and out carrying briefcases and coffee cups. Ordinary Tuesday morning. For them. For me, my own son had just asked a judge to decide whether I still belonged to myself. The 6 weeks before the hearing changed the way I looked at ordinary mistakes. Before Jason filed that petition, losing my reading glasses was annoying. Afterward, it felt like evidence. Forgetting why I had walked into the laundry room made my chest tighten. Missing one turn on the way to Kroger had me sitting in the parking lot, wondering whether my son had noticed something I hadn't. That was the cruelest part. He didn't just question my judgment in court. He planted doubt inside my own head. I started checking the stove 3 times before bed. I wrote appointments on the refrigerator, my phone, and a paper calendar beside the toaster. Every morning I opened the banking app just to reassure myself I still understood the numbers. I did, but fear has never cared much about facts. The probate investigator arrived on a gray Thursday afternoon. Her name was Margaret Collins. Mid-50s, practical shoes, navy folder, no nonsense. She declined coffee but accepted a glass of water. "I'm not here to trick you, Mrs. Mercer." "That's comforting." She gave me a small smile. "I'm here to understand how you live and whether you understand what's happening." I gestured toward the dining table. "Then you may want to sit down. Apparently, understanding my own life now requires documentation." She didn't laugh loudly, but the corner of her mouth moved. For nearly 2 hours, Margaret asked questions. Who paid my utilities? When had I last seen my primary care doctor? What medications did I take? Who had access to my checking account? Could I explain why I had nominated Maya for the housing program? I answered every one, then she asked to see my refrigerator. That surprised me. My refrigerator? Food access, medication storage, general safety. I opened the door. Eggs, yogurt, leftover chicken soup, half a lemon wrapped in foil for reasons I couldn't remember. Margaret noticed a plastic container with no date. What's that? I opened it, sniffed, and immediately shut it again. Something that has lost its constitutional right to remain in my home. She laughed that time. So did I. It helped. A little. Then she asked me today's date. I knew it. She asked who the governor was. I answered. She asked what I would do if I smelled gas. Leave the house and call the utility company from outside. Simple questions. Still, by the end, I felt as if someone had turned my private life inside out and laid it across the dining room table. When Margaret finally closed her folder, she said, "My report goes to the court. I don't make the final decision. I understand." She paused at the door. "For what it's worth, you explained your finances more clearly than most people half your age." I smiled. Don't tell my son. He'll ask me to do his taxes." After she left, the house went quiet again. Too quiet. That night, I called Maya just after midnight. She answered on the second ring. "Elaine, are you all right?" "I don't know." I sat at the edge of my bed with the lamp on. My knee throbbed. The room felt too warm. "The investigator came today. How did it go?" "Fine." "Then what's wrong?" I looked toward the dresser where Paul's photograph still stood. What if Jason is right about one thing? Maya didn't rush to reassure me. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. "Which thing?" "That I'm getting older." She was quiet for a moment. "You are getting older." I laughed once, but it came out thin. "Well, thank you. I'm getting older too." "You're 39, and my back hurts when I unload groceries." That made me smile. Then her voice softened. "Getting older isn't the same as disappearing, Elaine." I pressed my fingers against my eyes. I spent 40 years making decisions people depended on. Now I'm being asked what day it is like I'm a child. I know. What if I forget something during the hearing? Then you forget something. What if the judge thinks, "The judge is not deciding whether you're perfect," she paused, "only whether you're still you." That broke something open in me. I cried quietly so I wouldn't sound dramatic, which was ridiculous because Maya could hear me anyway. She stayed on the phone until I was calm. 2 days later, Henry called and asked me to come by Whitaker headquarters. The building felt strange without my name on an office door. I still reached for my old access badge before remembering I'd turned it in. Henry met me in the archive room downstairs. Boxes were stacked along the walls, old payroll ledgers, contract files, company newsletters from decades when everyone wore too much hairspray. He held a cream-colored envelope. "We found this behind a file drawer." My name was written across the front in Ruth's handwriting. I stopped breathing for a second. "When?" "Yesterday." I sat down before opening it. The paper inside had yellowed at the edges. Ruth had written the letter a few weeks before she died. She explained the old loan, the agreement, the housing trust. Then she wrote something Henry hadn't known. She never thought of saving the company as a sacrifice. She thought of it as repayment. Years earlier, after Maya's father left, Ruth had nearly lost her job because Maya kept getting sick. She had no paid leave left. Without telling anyone, I had covered 3 of Ruth's weekend shifts and told payroll I'd approved the hours. I barely remembered doing it. Ruth had never forgotten. The last lines read, "If anybody ever thanks me, tell them Elaine helped me first." She gave me time when time was the one thing I couldn't afford. I read it twice. Then I folded over the table and cried into both hands. Not politely, not quietly. Henry stood beside me without touching my shoulder or telling me to be strong. He simply let me grieve. For Ruth, for the years between us, for the fact that kindness could travel so far beyond the moment it was given. That afternoon, Denise called. Her voice had changed. More careful. "We found something." "What?" "Jason didn't start looking into guardianship after the ceremony." I gripped the phone. He spoke with an elder law attorney almost 3 months earlier. Before the house, before Cabo, before the empty chair. The retirement ceremony hadn't created his plan. It had only exposed it. The next morning, I met Denise at her office. A sealed envelope sat on the conference table. Inside were records showing the questions Jason had already been asking about my house, my accounts, and what would happen if someone else controlled them. I stared at the envelope without opening it. Then I looked at Denise. "How bad is it?" She rested one hand on the table. "Bad enough that you need to stop asking whether your son misunderstood you." She slid the envelope toward me. "And start asking what he expected to gain once you lost the right to speak for yourself." The sealed envelope sat on Denise Harper's conference table for nearly a full minute before I touched it. I wasn't afraid of finding out what Jason had done. I was afraid of discovering I'd spent months making excuses for something that had been obvious all along. Denise didn't rush me. She'd been practicing estate law long enough to understand that some documents change a family forever, Before anyone even reads the first page, finally I opened it. Inside wasn't one dramatic piece of evidence. It was several ordinary things: an appointment confirmation, a legal consultation invoice, notes from an elder law attorney documenting questions a prospective client had asked. Nothing illegal, nothing sensational. But together, they painted a picture that made my stomach turn. 3 months before my retirement ceremony, Jason had paid for a consultation about guardianship. One page listed questions in neat handwriting. If a parent becomes incapacitated, how quickly can real estate be listed? Who controls investment accounts? Can existing financial advisors be replaced? Can property be sold to pay for long-term care? I kept reading until the words blurred. Denise finally broke the silence. Planning for a parent's future isn't wrong. I know. But timing matters. She pointed to the date. This wasn't after your retirement. No. This wasn't after the housing trust. No, she folded her hands. He had already started planning a legal path toward controlling your affairs. I looked out the window toward downtown Columbus. Cars moved through the intersection below as though nothing had changed. For everyone else, Tuesday morning. For me, my son had apparently been preparing for a future where someone else signed my name. 3 days later, I met with Dr. Samuel Foster, the physician appointed to perform my independent cognitive evaluation. I'd spent decades interviewing executives, negotiating contracts, managing hundreds of employees. Yet somehow walking into that medical office made me feel like a nervous freshman taking an entrance exam. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Mrs. Mercer?" I stood. My knees reminded me exactly how old I was. The evaluation lasted almost 3 hours. Some parts were simple, others weren't. Dr. Foster asked me today's date, the president, the governor. He handed me a blank sheet of paper. Draw a clock showing 11:10. Easy enough. Then he asked me to remember 5 unrelated words: apple, bridge, tulip, window, copper. 20 minutes later, he asked for them again. I remembered 4. The 5th refused to come. I closed my eyes. Nothing. Heat crept into my face. "I'm sorry. Take your time." I couldn't. Finally, he smiled gently. It was copper. I let out a slow breath. I knew I'd heard it. "You did." I laughed weakly. "I also know exactly how this feels." He nodded. "It feels like failure." "Yes." "It isn't." He explained that healthy adults, especially under stress, often missed one item. I wanted to believe him. Still, driving home, I replayed that moment over and over. If I could forget one word, what else might I someday forget? Growing older has a way of making tiny mistakes sound much louder than they used to. 3 days later, Denise called. "The report's finished." I drove to her office without asking the result. Part of me didn't want to know until I absolutely had to. She slid the report across the desk. No evidence of dementia, no evidence of impaired judgment. Fully capable of managing personal, financial, and legal affairs. I read those 3 sentences twice. Not because I doubted them, because I needed to hear them from someone besides myself. I looked up. I've never been so relieved to discover I'm just a normal 67-year-old woman. Denise smiled. I've represented people much younger who couldn't explain their own checking account. I laughed. Don't tell Jason that. He'll accuse the doctor of being biased. The medical report should have ended everything. It didn't. The guardianship petition had already become public record. A local Columbus business blog ran a short article. Former Whitaker executive faces family guardianship dispute. The article was factual. But facts rarely stay alone online. Comments appeared underneath. Some blamed greedy children. Others assumed I must actually have dementia. One person wrote, "Nobody files guardianship unless something is seriously wrong." I closed my laptop. That one sentence stayed with me all afternoon. The housing trust also felt the impact. 2 corporate donors postponed scheduled contributions until the legal dispute was resolved. Not because they distrusted me, because nobody wanted headlines involving litigation. Maya called one evening sounding exhausted. I got another email. What did it say? That I manipulated a lonely old woman into giving me a mansion. I'm sorry. She sighed. I've been called worse. Then she became quiet. Maybe I should walk away. No, it would solve everything. It would solve Jason's problem. Another pause. But not yours. It isn't about me. Yes, I said firmly. It is. You qualified. You earned it. And your mother earned every brick in that house 30 years before either of us knew it existed. She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. I don't want your family destroyed because of me. I looked at the framed picture of Jason on my bookshelf. He was 8 years old, missing his front teeth, holding the biggest bluegill he'd ever caught. For a moment, I could almost hear him laughing. Then I remembered the court papers. The family started breaking long before you received those keys. A week before the hearing, Denise called again. This one matters. What happened? Someone wants to talk. His name was Caleb Morrison, Jason's college roommate. They'd stayed friends over the years. Caleb now worked for a title company outside Columbus. We met at a small coffee shop in Worthington. He looked uncomfortable from the moment he sat down. I almost didn't come. I appreciate that you did. He stared into his coffee. A few months ago, Jason left me a voicemail asking general questions. What kind of questions? The kind people ask when they're trying to understand how property transfers work after guardianship. My chest tightened. I didn't think much about it then. He swallowed hard. But after seeing everything on the news, he looked at me. I realized something didn't feel right. He handed Denise a flash drive. I never replied to the voicemail. You kept it? Our system automatically archives messages. Denise nodded. The original file? Timestamp and metadata intact. Back at her office, Denise plugged it into her laptop. Jason's voice filled the room. Casual, relaxed, almost cheerful. Hey, Caleb, quick question. Once Mom's in one of those retirement places, the Bexley house is basically dead equity anyway, right? Call me when you get a chance. 10 seconds, that was all. 10 ordinary seconds. No shouting. No threats. Somehow that made it worse, because he sounded like a man discussing a used car, not his mother. I stared at the dark computer screen after the recording ended. My hands rested quietly in my lap. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't angry either. Just tired, deeply tired. I spent 40 years teaching him to work hard, I whispered. I never imagined I'd also need to teach him the difference between waiting for an inheritance and waiting for your mother. Denise closed the laptop. The hearing is 4 days away. That afternoon, Henry Whitaker called. The board postponed the official public launch of the Ruth Bennett Housing Trust until the case is over. I expected that. But there's something I need to ask. What? When the court decides, he said gently, do you want Ruth's story to stay private? I looked out across my backyard where Paul's old maple tree still cast the same afternoon shade it had 20 years earlier. No, I answered quietly. I spent too many years protecting everyone's feelings. I took a slow breath. This time, I'm going to protect the truth. The hearing took place on a Tuesday morning in early October. By then, the leaves around the Franklin County Courthouse had started turning orange. The air carried that crisp Ohio smell that always reminds me summer is over whether I'm ready or not. I arrived 20 minutes early. Not because I wanted to. Because I knew my knees would need the extra time. Denise walked beside me, carrying 2 slim binders. You nervous? She asked. I've negotiated 8-figure contracts. And? I'd rather do that again. She smiled. I believe you. Jason was already inside. He stood near the courtroom doors wearing a navy suit I'd helped him buy years ago for his first management job. Brooke stood beside him holding a leather portfolio. For just a second, he looked like my little boy waiting outside the principal's office. Then he saw me. His expression hardened. Morning, Mom. Good morning. I wish it hadn't come to this. I looked at him quietly. So do I. No one said another word. The courtroom itself wasn't dramatic. No television cameras, no packed gallery. Just the judge, the court clerk, a few attorneys waiting for other cases, and the probate investigator I'd already met, exactly as it should have been. Real life rarely looks like television. The judge began with simple questions. Mrs. Mercer, do you understand why you're here today? Yes. Can you explain your finances? I explained my retirement accounts, my checking account, my investment portfolio, the trust revisions Denise had recommended. Then the judge asked something I hadn't expected. Why did you change your estate plan? I answered honestly. I didn't change it because I stopped loving my son. The courtroom became very still. I changed it because I realized love and trust aren't always the same thing. Even Jason looked down. Denise presented the medical evaluation. Then the probate investigator summarized her report. Elaine Mercer lives independently, manages medications appropriately, demonstrates sound financial reasoning. No evidence of diminished decision-making. The judge nodded while taking notes. Then, Carol Simmons, the realtor, testified. She carefully explained that she had refused to discuss Jason's private conversations, but had contacted me only to verify whether I had actually authorized anyone to explore selling my home. I became concerned because the property owner appeared unaware that inquiries were being made. Nothing more, nothing less, professional, truthful, exactly what Denise wanted. Next came my financial advisor. He testified that Jason had requested general information regarding incapacity planning without my knowledge. Again, not illegal, but revealing. Finally, Denise looked toward the judge. Your Honor, we'd like to introduce one final exhibit. The flash drive. Jason shifted in his chair. His attorney immediately objected. The recording lacks context. Denise remained calm. The message was voluntarily left by Mr. Mercer on another individual's business voicemail. The original file has been preserved exactly as received. The judge listened, then nodded. I'll allow it. 10 seconds. That was all. Jason's own voice filled the quiet courtroom. Once Mom's in one of those retirement places, the Bexley house is basically dead equity anyway. Silence. The judge removed his reading glasses. He looked directly at Jason. Mr. Mercer. Jason swallowed. Yes, Your Honor? You've repeatedly stated this petition was motivated solely by concern for your mother's welfare. Yes. The judge folded his hands. Help me understand how this voicemail reflects concern rather than anticipated financial control. Jason opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Finally, he muttered, It was a joke. The judge waited, then asked one question I'll never forget. Who exactly was supposed to laugh? Jason had no answer. 20 minutes later, the ruling was delivered. The petition was dismissed. The judge's words were measured. The court finds Mrs. Mercer fully capable of managing her own personal, financial, and legal affairs. Then he looked at Jason. Guardianship exists to protect vulnerable adults. It must never become a shortcut for resolving family disagreements or accelerating inheritance expectations. No anger, no lecture, just quiet disappointment. Somehow that felt heavier. Outside the courthouse, reporters weren't waiting. Life simply continued. People hurried toward lunch. Buses rolled past. A man walked his golden retriever across the street. The world hadn't stopped because one family had nearly fallen apart. Jason approached me near the courthouse steps. Mom, I turned. I'm sorry. It was the first apology I'd heard. But it sounded incomplete. Sorry he'd lost. Not necessarily sorry he'd tried. I need some time, I said. Then Denise and I walked away. 3 months passed. Autumn became winter. The legal case faded from public conversation. Donors returned. Construction resumed on the legacy home. The Whitaker board finally scheduled the official public launch of the Ruth Bennett Housing Trust during the company's annual employee gathering. Nearly 800 people attended, Retired carpenters, project managers, office staff, city leaders, families whose parents had spent decades building neighborhoods together. Local television streamed portions of the event online. Henry Whitaker stood at the podium. "For 30 years," he began, "our company benefited from a woman very few people ever knew." A photograph of Ruth filled the screen. He told her story. Not dramatically, simply, honestly, how one single mother quietly kept 60 families employed during the darkest financial year our company had ever faced. Then he invited Maya onto the stage. The audience stood. Not because she had received a beautiful home, because everyone finally understood why. Henry announced that the trust had already approved funding for 3 additional homes over the next several years. That should have been the end. Instead, Jason stood. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. He looked toward the stage. "This whole thing is unfair." The room fell silent. He pointed toward Maya. "She manipulated my mother." Gasps spread across the ballroom. Henry started to respond. I gently touched his sleeve. "I'd like to." He stepped aside. I walked slowly to the microphone. No anger, no raised voice, just calm. I looked directly at Jason. "You've spent months telling people someone stole your family's future." I paused. "The truth is, that house was never mine to give you." I explained Ruth's legal agreement, the independent selection committee, the charitable housing trust, the board's decision. Then I looked at Maya. The only thing I ever did was recommend someone whose life reflected everything Ruth believed in. Jason interrupted. "That's not the whole story." "No," I nodded, "it isn't." I turned toward the technician. "Please play the recording admitted during probate court." Only 10 seconds, nothing more. Jason's own words echoed across the ballroom. When the recording ended, nobody applauded, nobody cheered. The room simply sat in stunned silence. I looked at my son. "You weren't waiting to help me grow old." I swallowed. "You were waiting for me to stop making my own decisions." His shoulders slowly dropped. For the first time, he had nothing left to argue. People imagine that winning in court feels like crossing a finish line. For me, it felt more like walking out of a hospital after a long illness. I was grateful. I was exhausted. And I knew healing wouldn't happen just because a judge had ruled in my favor. The first Monday after the hearing, I woke up at 6 o'clock out of habit. For 40 years, my mornings had followed the same rhythm: coffee, local news, a quick glance at the weather. Then out the door before Columbus traffic became unbearable. That morning, there was nowhere I needed to be. I stood in my kitchen holding a coffee mug, staring at the clock. For the first time in decades, my calendar was almost empty. Retirement had finally arrived, just not the way I'd imagined. 2 months later, I had my long-planned knee replacement surgery at Ohio Health Riverside Methodist Hospital. The operation went well, but recovery was humbling. I've always been the person helping everyone else. Now I needed help getting into bed, help carrying laundry, help reaching the top shelf in the pantry. More than once, Maya offered to move into my house for a few weeks. I shook my head every time. "You've already done enough." "I don't mind." "I know." She looked disappointed. "I want to help," I smiled. "And I appreciate that." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "But love shouldn't become unpaid labor." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I think your boundaries are getting stronger." They had to. Instead, I hired a licensed home health aide for a few hours each afternoon. It wasn't cheap. It also wasn't something I needed to feel guilty about. For the first time in my life, I accepted help without feeling like I owed someone a piece of myself in return. By early spring, Maya had moved into the legacy home. Calling it a mansion always made me laugh. Yes, it was beautiful. But what mattered wasn't the square footage. It was what happened inside. One downstairs guest suite became temporary housing for women caring for sick family members who suddenly had nowhere safe to stay. The first guest was a 63-year-old widow named Patricia. She'd spent weeks sleeping in her car while driving her brother to cancer treatments in Columbus. When Maya handed her a key, Patricia cried so hard she couldn't speak. I happened to be there that afternoon, not because I was on the board, not because anyone asked me to make a speech. I'd simply brought over a pot of homemade chicken noodle soup. Patricia hugged me. "I don't know how to thank all of you," I smiled. "Take a shower." She laughed through her tears. "And get some sleep." Sometimes kindness really is that ordinary. Life slowly became quieter, not perfect, just quieter. Then one afternoon in May, I found an envelope in my mailbox, Jason's handwriting. I carried it inside before opening it. The letter wasn't dramatic. There were no excuses. No demands, no requests for money. He admitted something I'd never expected him to say. I kept telling myself I was protecting you. I think the truth is, I was trying to control what frightened me. Watching you get older scared me. Somewhere along the way, I confused planning with ownership. I also confused inheritance with responsibility. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I finally understand why you couldn't trust me. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it inside my desk drawer. Not because everything was fixed, because honesty deserved to be kept. A week later, I called him. "Would you like breakfast?" There was a long silence. "I'd like that." We met at a Bob Evans in Worthington, the same restaurant where Paul used to insist on ordering too many biscuits. Jason arrived early. So did I. For a few awkward minutes, we talked about traffic, the weather, my physical therapy, his new consulting work. Eventually, the waitress refilled our coffee. Jason looked down into his cup. "I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times. I believe you. I don't know how to undo what I did. You can't." He nodded slowly. "I figured." Another long silence settled between us. Finally, he looked up. "Do you still love me?" That question sounded so much like the little boy who used to crawl into my lap after scraping his knee that my heart almost gave out. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Every single day." His eyes filled. "So," I continued gently, "don't mistake my boundaries for a lack of love. I won't. I hope someday we rebuild something." "So do I. But we're going to rebuild it honestly." "No shortcuts," he nodded. "No shortcuts." Neither of us pretended everything was suddenly wonderful. Real trust doesn't grow back in a single breakfast. But something important happened that morning. For the first time in nearly a year, we were talking to each other, instead of trying to win. Almost exactly 1 year after my retirement, Whitaker Residential dedicated the 4th home funded through the Ruth Bennett Legacy Housing Trust. A small bronze plaque stood beside the front walkway. It read, "Ruth Bennett." She believed a home should always feel safer than the world outside. Henry stood beside me reading it quietly. I wish she could have seen this. So do I. Children rode bicycles up and down the sidewalk. Neighbors carried flower pots across their lawns. Someone laughed from a nearby porch. Life. Simple, ordinary life. The kind Ruth had quietly protected years before any of us understood what she'd done. I looked toward Maya, who was planting lavender beneath the front windows with a group of volunteers. She caught my eye and waved. I waved back. Then I realized something. When I first retired, I thought my career had been the most important thing I'd built. I was wrong. The most valuable things I'd ever created couldn't be listed on a resume. Trust, friendship, the courage to tell the truth. And finally, the willingness to protect my own peace. Growing older didn't make me less capable. It simply revealed who could celebrate my independence and who mistook my kindness for permission. If you've ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you love, I hope you remember this. Protecting your dignity doesn't mean your heart has become smaller. Sometimes it's the only way to leave room for healing. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reminded you of someone, or perhaps even yourself, I hope you'll share your thoughts. I'd truly love to read them.